In a recent conversation with Alex O'Connor of Cosmic Skeptic, he shared something that got me thinking about the appeal of religious arguments.
One of the biggest criticisms that I have of Christianity is the problem of divine hiddenness. If there is a God who wants to come to know us, why does he seemingly so routinely hide his existence from so many of us? This is an argument. This is something that can be syllogized, as Schellenberg famously did. It's an argument you can put in premise form. But what it's getting at is not something in argumentative form, but rather the lack of experience. And so this is an argument that I think works, and I think is a good reason to doubt the truth of Christianity. But the moving part of the argument, the captivating part of the argument, is not the way that the premises entail the conclusion, but rather the intuitive feeling that this lack of experience is somehow meaningful in trying to determine whether Christianity is true or not.
Leading with arguments which are meant to be intuitively convincing most of all is common in discourse on philosophy, religion, politics, and any other subject really, though few, I think, are willing to be as honest about that as Alex. Some formal arguments for God, I'd say, go even further than intuitive appeal and instead play on our emotions, especially existential fears. These arguments are so optimized for this that they, for certain believers, serve less as a justification for belief in God and more as a justification for beliefs which help mitigate existential dread. In a way, these arguments for God are not really about God. Before we get into specifics, I've got two disclaimers. One, I'm not saying all arguments for God are this way. Ontological and cosmological arguments, for instance, while sometimes quite intuitive, are not emotionally appealing. Two, this discussion is not meant to show that the arguments in question are logically invalid or unsound. While I do think these arguments are unsound, that is not for any reason that I'll present here. Alright, let's jump in. Arguments from morality. One popular form of an argument from morality is syllogized as follows. If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Objective moral values exist, therefore God exists. The idea that morality might not be so simple as to be called objective in some transcendent sense is frightening for many, especially when it's conflated with total moral chaos in frenzied statements from religious apologists.
So it's not an objective morality then, that's what you're saying. Right? Morality's not objective.
No, it's not.
Okay, so there's nothing wrong with the Nazis, there's nothing wrong with rape, slavery.
When the alternative to accepting the argument is framed as accepting the worst atrocities imaginable, fears are stoked, and accepting the argument appears to be the only relief. This argument can play on more subtle, positive emotions too. Believing morality is transcendently objective can allow us to believe that morality is as simple as our strong moral impulses can make it seem. That our emotions which tell us that our moral group is superior to all others are unique and justified objectively. So, I think many accept this argument largely because they want one of its premises to be true, not just because they want its conclusion to be true. Even though the conclusion of this argument, that God exists, rests on the premise that objective morality exists, I think many come to view each of these ideas as justification for the other. Not only does God exist because morality is objective, but morality is objective because God exists. In this way, ideas about God become wrapped up in how we manage our existential fears and sense of moral superiority. Arguments from fine-tuning. This argument goes something like, cosmology shows us that there are several physical constants that govern the universe as we know it. If any one of those constants were even slightly different, the universe as we know it, including life, would not exist. The constants existing as they do is highly improbable without the intentional fine-tuning of an intelligent creator, so it's more probable that a creator does exist and is responsible for this fine-tuning. The way this is often presented focuses on humans as the end product of the universe, the entire point of its existence. This is extremely flattering. We want to be the end product of the universe. We find ourselves to be more important than anything in the universe, so it only fits to believe that there's some grand cosmic reason for that. Those who present this argument could focus on the universe being fine-tuned for creating spheres of gas, or centuries-long storms on gas giants like Jupiter, or binary pulsars, but that wouldn't stroke our egos quite as well. Of course, the alternative to accepting this argument, apologists often claim, is embracing self-hating nihilism. Because after all, if we are not the entire point of the universe, it's impossible for us to matter in any way at all.
In atheism, do we have any reason to believe that human beings are special? No. We're just evolved creatures. We're the result of accident and chance. And this is part of the existential crisis for those who are atheists. Because atheism reduces us to cosmic junk. We are just biological accidents. We're the ultimate unplanned pregnancy. Our physical parts are just stuck together without any reason, without any purpose. Human beings are nothing.
When this kind of dichotomy is presented, accepting the fine-tuning argument is very appealing. Once again, the appeal of this argument lies in its premises and presentation, not in its conclusion. We believe this because of what it says about us, not because of what it says about God. Arguments from consciousness. There are many different forms of arguments from consciousness, but generally they all involve the ideas that human consciousness is non-physical, that consciousness has not been or can't be explained naturalistically, and that the existence of a non-physical mind like God explains the existence of consciousness. Arguments from the apparent design of other physiological features like the eye or hand do exist, but I believe those to be far less convincing than the argument from consciousness because those features are not as important to us as consciousness. A man with no eyes, hands, or most other physical features is still a man, but a man without consciousness? That is an automaton or an animal. At this argument's base is the assumption that human consciousness is so unique that it must not be a result of physical processes. The core of humanity is not composed of the profane, but rather the sacred. This is, in my view, purely self-congratulatory. We want to believe that we humans possess some quality which makes us unique from all other complex systems in the universe and superior to all other animals. More important than justifying belief in God, this argument provides a satisfying explanation for why we are so special. Our sense of self-awareness was supernaturally created by the only thing in the universe that could ever be superior to us, God himself. While we're on the topic of staying aware of emotional appeal and biased presentation, let me tell you about Ground News, this video sponsor. Tons of commenters have let me know that they love Ground News and are happy I plugged it a few videos back, so hear me out. Ground News is a website and app that lets you compare news across the political spectrum effortlessly. They aggregate news from thousands of sources and, right up front, show you political bias, ownership of news outlets, and factual reliability. This way you can see through bias straight away and get informed easily. So check out this story about the Supreme Court taking on another religious freedom case. Ground News provides a summary at the top for every story. I can also see that there are 117 sources reporting on this, and then if I scroll down, I can see that every source is rated as far as factuality, locality, and political bias. Let's look at the bias distribution tool on this. This is one of my favorite tools from Ground News. Only 10% right political bias coverage, so not many right-leaning sources reporting on this as compared to center and left. Interesting, I wonder why that is. Now that I've checked all of that out, I can compare articles and start reading. If you want to stay informed, you've got to get out of your echo chamber and account for bias when reading the news. I use Ground News because it's simply the most efficient way I've found to do that. So to try it out and support my channel in the process, click the link in the description or pinned comment, that's ground.news/skeptic, to try it for free. Or if you subscribe to Ground News by December 20th, you'll get 35% off their top subscriptions and unlimited access for as little as $2 a month. All right, back to the video. Okay, to recap, I think what happens psychologically when we hear these arguments is something like this. We want to believe the argument's premises because of their emotional appeal, so we accept them intuitively. We believe the alternative to this is despair. Those premises are used to support the existence of God. Acceptance of God's involvement in these things provides explanation and justification for these ideas. This creates a process of reciprocal justification. God exists because these premises are true, and these premises are true because God exists. When God is doubted, it's believed that if God doesn't exist, those premises aren't true. We don't want to despair, so we continue, or at least try, to accept them. On despair. Baked into the presentation and emotional appeal of these arguments is the assumption that despair is inevitable if we reject their premises. Some who make this claim even attempt to support it through some form of logical argument, saying something like, it's irrational to be happy if God doesn't exist. This is a meaningless statement. Emotional states are not generated through some rational process. Emotions are not a product of reason and therefore can't be called rational or irrational. In fact, emotional states largely precede rational thought. For those interested to read about this, I encourage you to check out an article linked in the description, The Emotional Dog and Its Rational Tale. The assertion that despair results from rejecting these premises is a claim about human psychology. As such, it must be demonstrated in its own right through direct observation, not through argument alone. If religious apologists want to support this idea, they must present relevant data on the psychological outcomes of rejecting these premises. Until they do that, they have nothing but empty rhetoric and irrelevant logical syllogisms. When I first left Christianity, I had so much anxiety surrounding the concepts of morality, design, and consciousness, because I thought that if I didn't believe in the Christian God and all the things that belief justifies, this anxiety was inevitable. When I finally realized that this idea itself was a piece of Christian dogma, not just common sense, my mindset began to change. Non-Christians, even non-theists, have always existed, I thought to myself, and many have grappled with humanity's place in the universe well enough to enjoy their lives. Maybe I could do that too. With time and self-care, I dealt with and eventually overcame this anxiety to the point where I no longer feel it at all. Today, I understand that Christian leadership taught me about the supposed inevitability of despair without God in order to scare me into believing. The sad truth is that I only suffered that anxiety so severely in the first place because Christians instilled it in me and gave me only one way to manage it: believe whatever they tell me. Why address the emotional appeal of apologetics? Ideally, the arguments we've discussed should be accepted or rejected based on their logical validity and soundness. But as much as those on either side of religious debates like to think they accept or reject arguments entirely based on cool rationality, this is rarely how things play out. For most people, I think, these arguments must be divorced from their emotional appeal for them to be considered rationally. This means that dissecting their implicit claim that humans are transcendently special, as well as a claim that often accompanies them, that rejecting their premises leads to despair, is just as vital to helping others think rationally about these arguments as actually addressing their logic. When someone like me does this, though, proponents of these arguments tend to have a problem with that. I discuss the emotional appeal of these arguments, and they say that I'm purposely distracting from the real issue, the logic of the argument. I say that they were the first to present these arguments in an emotionally charged way, and they say I'm engaging in an ad hominem attack. I don't mean to insult anyone, and none of my points actually rest upon an attack on anyone's character, as ad hominems do. I'll go ahead and make sure I say, though, that I genuinely don't think that those who present these arguments in an emotionally charged way mean any harm. In fact, I think they're trying to help people. But regardless of intent, emotional manipulation is emotional manipulation. And like I said, if we want to look at these arguments rationally, their emotional appeal and the way they're presented must be scrutinized as well. So now that we've done this, I hope that the viewer is able to view these arguments a bit more rationally, with emotional appeal understood and biases acknowledged. Thanks for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. A special thanks to my patrons for their constant love and support. If you want to hear more from me, then subscribe. As always, if you are an apostate in need, there are resources linked in the description to help you find community and mental health support. Remember to be kind to others in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical. Oh, and remember to check out Ground News. You guys know how picky I am about sponsors, right? It's actually a good one.